$1,847. Not a round number. Not 2,000, not 1,500. 1,847. I stared at that figure on my father's old laptop screen at 2:47 in the morning, and I knew, instantly, bone deep, that this number meant something. It was too specific to be random, too consistent to be a mistake, and it had been leaving my parents' checking account on the 3rd of every month for 14 years. Straight to my sister, never to me. Not once. If you've ever had that feeling where your stomach drops, but your brain hasn't caught up yet, where your body knows you're looking at something terrible before you can articulate why, then you already understand what happened to me in that dim guest bedroom at my parents' house in Westerville, Ohio. If you've ever been the one in your family who had to earn every single thing while someone else just seemed to collect them, you might want to stick around for this one. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because the paper trail exists, and because sometimes the only way to make sense of a betrayal that big is to lay it out piece by piece until the picture becomes undeniable. I was only staying there because my father had torn his ACL playing pickup basketball 3 weeks earlier. At 62, Robert Miller still thought he was 25, and now he was stuck on the main floor with a walker, barking orders about bills that needed paying and accounts that needed checking. My mother, Linda, had never been good with computers. She still double-clicked hyperlinks and treated the right mouse button like it might detonate something. So I had volunteered to come over for the weekend to help them catch up on the financial backlog. I'm 30 years old. I work as a logistics coordinator for a medical supply company in Columbus. I make $54,000 a year, which sounds fine until you factor in student loans, rent, car payments, and the general cost of being alive in 2026. I don't have extra money. I don't have a safety net. I have a budget spreadsheet that I update every Sunday night with the kind of religious devotion most people reserve for actual religion. My sister Megan is 33. She lives in a 3-bedroom townhouse in Dublin with a finished basement and a kitchen island that has a waterfall countertop. She's a part-time yoga instructor. Her husband, Derek, is a freelance graphic designer who works when inspiration strikes, which apparently isn't very often. They have 2 kids. They take vacations to Sedona. They have a Peloton bike in the living room. I've never asked how they afford it, because asking would mean admitting that I've been doing the math in my head for years, and the numbers never add up. Growing up, our parents were obsessed with fairness. That was the word they used like a shield. Fair. Everything had to be fair. If Megan got a new coat for winter, I got a new coat. If I got a bicycle for my birthday, Megan got rollerblades of equal value. We took turns picking the restaurant on family nights. We drew straws for who got the front seat. My mother kept a literal ledger on the refrigerator for a few years, a chart with our names and check marks to prove that Christmas gifts were balanced down to the dollar. It was exhausting, but it was also comforting. It meant we were safe. It meant the love was measured and distributed evenly, like flour in a recipe. And as long as the scale balanced, nobody could say they were less loved. But scales only tell you what's on them at that moment. They don't tell you what's being hidden behind your back. I found the wire transfers in a folder labeled MM Auto. At first, I thought it was something to do with Mom's car insurance. The folder was nested inside a directory called Household-Rec, which sat inside another directory called Archives-2011 to 2025. My father was nothing if not organized. I clicked it open expecting to find Geico statements or oil change receipts. Instead, I found PDF files. Hundreds of them. Each one was named with a date. Wire confirm _010311 Wire confirm _ 020311.pdf, and on and on. I opened the first one. It was a confirmation from Huntington Bank. Originator, Robert and Linda Miller, joint checking. Recipient, Megan Miller. Amount, $1,847.00. Frequency, monthly. Status, completed. I checked the next one. Same thing. 3rd of February, 2011. $1,847. I kept clicking. March, April, May, every month. The amount never changed, not by a penny. Not when the economy crashed, not when inflation hit, not when my father got laid off from the distribution center in 2015 and spent 8 months collecting unemployment. Not when my mother had her gallbladder surgery in 2019 and the bills stacked up on the kitchen counter like a deck of cards. Every single month, without fail, $1,847 moved from my parents' account to my sister's account. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the screen making my hands look like they belonged to a corpse, and I did the math. 14 years, 168 months, 168 wire transfers. At $1,847 each, that was $310,056. Over $300,000. My parents had sent my sister over $300,000 while I had been told, repeatedly, that they were on a fixed income, that they couldn't help with my student loans, that they wished they could do more but money was tight, that I needed to be independent, that hard work built character. I remembered the day I graduated from Ohio State, May 2018. I had $38,000 in student debt. My parents gave me a card with $100 in it and a necklace my mother had inherited from her aunt. They hugged me and said they were proud. I remembered the day Megan graduated from a 2-year art program at a community college. My parents threw a party at the house. They bought her a car, a used Honda Civic, but still, a car. I remembered calling my mother in 2020, during the pandemic, when my hours got cut and I couldn't make rent. I was crying on the phone, standing in the parking lot of my apartment complex because I didn't want my roommate to hear me beg. My mother had been quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Claire, you know we love you, but we're not in a position to help right now. Your father's hours got cut too. We're barely making the mortgage." I had believed her. I had felt guilty for even asking. I got a second job stocking shelves at Target from midnight to 6 in the morning, and I didn't call them for 3 months because I was ashamed of my own weakness. Now I was staring at proof that they had been making it rain on my sister while I was swallowing my pride and eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. But here's the thing that kept me sitting there, frozen, at 3:15 in the morning. It wasn't just the money. It was the number. 1,847. It wasn't 2,000. It wasn't 1,500. It wasn't a nice, round, made-up figure that you pull out of the air when you decide to help your kid with groceries. It was precise. It was contractual. It was the kind of number that shows up in legal documents and trust distributions and structured settlements. It had a source. It had a reason. And I had a sick, crawling feeling that the reason had something to do with me. I closed the laptop. I walked down the hallway past my parents' bedroom, my father's snoring rattling the door, my mother's shape a silent lump under the floral comforter, and I went down to the basement. The carpeted stairs creaked under my feet, each step sounding like a confession. The basement smelled like laundry detergent and old cardboard. My father had built shelves down there 20 years ago, and they were packed with the accumulated sediment of a family life. Photo albums, tax returns, bins of outgrown clothes, a treadmill that functioned as a coat rack. I knew where the important papers were. My father had a metal filing cabinet next to the water heater. It was gray, dented on the bottom left corner from when I ran into it with a tricycle at age 4. He kept it locked, but the key was in the junk drawer upstairs in the kitchen. I had known that since I was 12. I went back up, got the key, and returned to the basement. The drawer slid open with a shriek that made me wince. Inside, hanging folders were labeled in my father's blocky capital letters: utilities, taxes, insurance, medical, and toward the back, a folder with no label. Just a manila envelope, slightly fatter than the others, held closed with a rubber band that had gone brittle and cracked. I took it out. I sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor, wearing my old high school sweatshirt and a pair of socks with a hole in the toe. I slipped off the rubber band. Inside were paper copies of every wire transfer I had just seen on the laptop. 168 printed confirmations, stacked in chronological order, the paper yellowing slightly at the edges. My father's handwriting on a Post-it note stuck to the first one. Megan, monthly. Do not discuss with C. Do not discuss with C. I read those 4 words until they stopped looking like English. Until they became shapes. Until they became a door swinging shut in my face. I wasn't just the unfavored child. I was the secret. I was the person they were actively hiding this from. The deception wasn't passive. It wasn't that they had helped Megan and simply failed to mention it. It was aggressive. It was guarded. It was a conspiracy with a code of silence, and my initial was the warning label. I flipped through the receipts. My hands were shaking so badly that the paper rattled. January 2011. That was the starting point. I did the math. Megan would have been 21. I would have been 18, a senior in high school. What happened in January 2011? I searched my memory. Megan had dropped out of her first college that fall. She had moved back home for a few months, then announced she was getting an apartment with a friend in Clintonville. My parents had helped her move. They had given her furniture from the basement, a couch, a bed frame, a kitchen table. I remembered being slightly jealous, but telling myself that fairness didn't mean identical treatment. She was older. She needed more help. That was fair, right? But $1,847 a month wasn't furniture. That was a salary. That was a lifestyle. I kept looking. Buried 3/4 of the way through the stack, around 2017, I found something different. Not a wire transfer. A statement from a law office. Keller and Associates, Estate Planning. The letterhead was cream-colored with a navy border. The date was March 14th, 2017. It was addressed to my father. Dear Mr. Miller, it read, enclosed, please find the executed amendment to the irrevocable trust established by Eleanor Miller, dated January 3rd, 1995. As discussed, the modification to Article 4, Section B has been processed in accordance with your request. The trustee distribution schedule remains unchanged. Please confirm receipt. Eleanor Miller was my grandmother, my father's mother. She died when I was 16. I remembered her vaguely, a severe woman with silver hair who smelled like gardenias and who always gave us savings bonds at Christmas. I had one, somewhere in a drawer, a $50 savings bond that matured to something like $80. I had assumed that was my inheritance, a gesture, a token. But an irrevocable trust? Established in 1995? I would have been a year old. I stared at the letter until my eyes burned. The date on the trust amendment, March 2017, was 6 years after the wire transfers started. That meant the wire transfers predated the amendment, which meant the money and the trust were connected. But they weren't the same thing. Or maybe they were. Maybe the wire transfers were the visible part of something much larger, and the amendment was the mechanism that made it permanent. I needed to know what was in that trust. I needed to know what Article 4, Section B said. I needed to know why a law office was sending my father amendments to a document I had never heard of, concerning a grandmother who had died before I could vote, and why my initial was the one they agreed not to discuss this with. I put the letter back in the envelope. I put the envelope back in the filing cabinet. I locked it. I went upstairs. I lay down on the guest bed with the spring that dug into my hip, and I stared at the ceiling until the gray light of dawn started bleeding through the curtains. My father would be awake soon. He would want his coffee. He would want to talk about the bills. He would smile at me and call me Claire Bear like he had my whole life. And I would have to look at his face and wonder how many times he had said that name while signing away money that should have been mine. Or at least money that should have been explained to me. Or at least money that didn't require a Post-it note warning him not to let me find out. I had 168 receipts. I had one letter from a law office, and I had a number, 1,847, that was starting to feel less like an amount and more like a combination to a lock I didn't know I was trapped behind. I was going to open it, all the way open. But first, I needed to know what happened in January 2011, because that was the month the money started flowing, and that was the month I was starting to remember that Megan came home from college with a secret she only told my parents behind a closed door. I needed to hear that conversation. Or at least, I needed to find out what was said. Because whatever it was, it had cost me $310,000, and I had a feeling the price was still climbing. The coffee maker hissed at 6:15, and I was already standing at the kitchen counter with my arms folded so tight across my chest that my shoulders ached. My father thumped down the hallway on his walker, the rubber feet squeaking against the hardwood in a rhythm I had known since childhood. Squeak, thump. Squeak, thump. He rounded the corner in his old Ohio State sweatpants and smiled at me. "You're up early, Claire Bear." I had rehearsed this. In the mirror at 3 a.m, I had practiced looking exactly the way I looked every other Saturday. Tired, dutiful, slightly bored. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Figured I'd get a jump on those utility bills you mentioned." He lowered himself into the kitchen chair with a grunt. The walker folded and leaned against the cabinet. My mother shuffled in behind him, her robe belted tight, her hair flattened on one side from the pillow. She went straight to the refrigerator. She didn't look at me. She never looked at me first thing in the morning. She was focused on the orange juice, the butter, the pancake mix. But yesterday I wouldn't have noticed. Yesterday I would have thought nothing of it. Today, it felt like evidence. "You find everything you needed on the computer?" my father asked. He was reaching for his coffee mug, the one with the chip on the handle that he'd been using for a decade. "Yeah," I said. "Everything's organized. You guys are in good shape." "Good girl," he said. "I don't know what we'd do without you." My mother poured batter onto the griddle. The smell of hot butter filled the kitchen. I watched her wrist rotate as she spread the batter into a circle. I thought about the Post-it note. "Do not discuss with C." I wondered if she had known about the note, if she had watched him write it, if she had ever stood in this same kitchen and warned Megan not to mention the wire transfers over Sunday dinner. I ate half a pancake. I don't remember what it tasted like. I left at 8. I kissed my mother's cheek. I told my father I'd be back next weekend to help with his follow-up appointment. I loaded my duffel bag into my Honda Civic, and I drove south on Route 315 toward Columbus with my hands locked at 10 and 2, my knuckles white, my jaw so tight I could feel a headache blooming behind my left eye. The highway was gray. The sky was the color of old dishwater. I kept seeing that number projected onto the windshield like a heads-up display, 1,847. Every time I passed a mile marker, I did the math again. 14 years, 168 months, $310,000. I said it out loud in the car, just to hear how it sounded in my own voice. It sounded like a verdict. I didn't go to work on Monday. I called in sick for the first time in 2 years, and I spent the day sitting on the floor of my apartment with a Rubbermaid bin that had been shoved into the back of my closet since I moved in. The bin was labeled Keepsakes, College, in my own handwriting, the letters rounded and naive. Inside, under old textbooks and a dried corsage from a homecoming dance I barely remembered, I found a photo album with a padded cover. My 21st birthday. I flipped it open. March 22nd, 2017. My mother had taken the pictures with a digital camera, and the timestamps were printed in the corners in yellow digits. There I was at Red Lobster on Morse Road, wearing a black dress I had bought on clearance at Macy's. There was my father, holding up a glass of iced tea, his phone face down on the table. There was my mother, smiling with her lips closed the way she always did for photos. There was the fossil watch they had given me, still in the box on the table. I remembered that night with a clarity that made my stomach fold in on itself. My father had checked his phone 17 times. I had counted. I remembered because I had thought it was rude. I remembered my mother saying, "Bob, put that away, it's Claire's birthday." And he had said, "Work emergency. Sorry, Claire Bear. Big deal closing this week." He had looked stressed, distracted. I had felt bad for him. I had told him it was fine, that I understood, that his job was important. The letter from Keller and Associates was dated March 14th, 2017, 8 days before my birthday. While I was blowing out candles and feeling guilty that my father had to work on my special day, he wasn't closing a deal. He was waiting for confirmation that I had been legally cut out of my own grandmother's trust. He was waiting for the paperwork that would make sure I never saw a dime of the money that was supposed to start flowing to me when I turned 21. He had looked stressed because he was committing fraud, not because of a conference call. I sat on my apartment floor with the photo album in my lap, and I cried until my throat was raw. It wasn't the money. It was the watch. It was the $100 gift card to Target. It was the performance of it. They had sat across from me in a chain restaurant, watched me open a $200 watch, and they had already known for 8 days that they had amended a legal document to ensure I would never receive what was mine. The watch wasn't a gift. It was a prop. It was part of the set dressing for a play called We Love Both Our Daughters Equally. I didn't sleep that night. At 4 a.m, I made a list on my phone. I needed the original trust document. I needed to know what Article 4, Section B said. I needed to know what property was involved, and I needed to know if there was more. If the wire transfers were just the surface, if the real theft was structural, built into deeds and titles and legal instruments I had never been told existed. I called my mother at 9 on Tuesday morning. "Hey, Mom," I said. My voice sounded light, stranger's voice. "Dad mentioned he needs some old tax documents for the accountant. The guy's coming Thursday, right? He asked me to pull the 2015 files from the basement cabinet. I have a key. Is it okay if I stop by this afternoon? You guys will be at the orthopedist until 2, right? Oh, sure, honey, she said. You know where everything is. There's leftover lasagna in the fridge if you get hungry. I was at the house by 12:30. The orthopedist appointment was at 1:15. I had at least 2 hours. I went straight to the basement. The filing cabinet was waiting, gray and dented, like a vault with a bad secret. I unlocked it with the junk drawer key. The hanging folders slid on their rails with a sound like bones clicking. Utilities, taxes, insurance, medical, and then, behind medical, a folder I hadn't seen the first time. It was unlabeled, manila, and it was held shut with a black binder clip. I took it out. I sat on the cold floor. I opened it. The first document was 31 pages, bound with a brass fastener in the upper left corner. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, legal-sized. Across the top, in embossed letters, the Eleanor M. Miller Irrevocable Trust, dated January 3rd, 1995. I read it with the flashlight on my phone because the basement light had always been dim, and I was shaking too hard to stand up and flip the switch. Article 1. The Grantor. Eleanor M. Miller, my grandmother. She had transferred the property at 442 North Cassidy Avenue in Bexley, Ohio, into this trust, a duplex. I knew the house. I had been inside it a dozen times as a child. It had a sun porch with yellow cushions and a lilac bush in the front yard that smelled so strong in May it made you dizzy. My grandmother had lived in the downstairs unit. A graduate student had rented the upstairs. I remembered helping her carry groceries up those porch steps. I remembered her giving me a $50 savings bond and telling me to save it for something important. Article 3. The Trustee. Robert J. Miller, my father, sole trustee, with full fiduciary duty to manage the property for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Article 4. The Beneficiaries. Section A named Megan Ann Miller. Section B named Claire Elizabeth Miller. Equal, undivided beneficial interest, 50% each. Section C. Distribution of income. Net rental income from the property, after taxes, insurance, maintenance, and trustee fees, to be distributed in equal shares to each beneficiary upon reaching the age of 21. Until such age, income to be held in trust and reinvested for the benefit of both beneficiaries equally. I read it 3 times. Net rental income. The document included a schedule of projected monthly distributions based on current lease agreements. The figure listed was $3,694.00 total monthly net. Divided equally, $1,847.00 per beneficiary. $1,847. It wasn't random. It wasn't made up. It was exactly half of the rental income from my grandmother's duplex. It was my grandmother's attempt to give her granddaughters stability, a roof that paid for itself, a legacy measured in mortgage payments and lease agreements instead of gardenia perfume. And my father had been sending my sister my half since before I was old enough to claim it. I kept reading. Article 5. Trustee powers. Standard language. My father could hire property managers, pay bills, maintain the asset. But there was a clause at the end of Article 5, Section D, handwritten in blue ink and initialed by my grandmother. Under no circumstances shall the trust property be sold, transferred, or conveyed to any beneficiary in lieu of scheduled income distributions without unanimous written consent of all beneficiaries. I stared at that line until my eyes blurred. My grandmother had known. She had known my father well enough to know that he might try to play favorites. She had put up a guardrail, and he had driven straight through it. Behind the trust agreement, I found a quitclaim deed, dated June 12, 2019. Grantor, Robert J. Miller, trustee of the Eleanor M. Miller Irrevocable Trust. Grantee, Megan Ann Miller. Property, 442 North Cassidy Avenue, Bexley, Ohio. Consideration, $1 and love and affection. He had given her the house, not just the income, the asset itself. The duplex my grandmother had specifically protected from transfer. He had quitclaimed it to Megan for $1 while I was working double shifts and eating peanut butter for dinner. I set the deed down carefully, like it was made of ash. My hands were numb. There was one more document in the folder. A printed email, 3 pages, the paper still crisp. The date was August 14th, 2023. From megannmiller@gmail.com to robert.miller@yahoo.com, linda.miller@yahoo.com. Hi, Mom and Dad. I wanted to say thank you again for getting the property deed switched over last year. Derek and I met with our financial advisor, and having the house fully in my name has made a huge difference for our long-term planning. The kids' 529 plans are finally where they need to be. I know this has been stressful, and I hate that you both have to worry about Claire finding out. I know she's been struggling lately. She mentioned her car needs new tires, and she's stressed about rent again. And I worry that if she knew about the trust, she'd try to make it into some kind of legal thing. I don't want the girls to grow up around family drama. Their stability means everything to me. I really appreciate you protecting us. I know it hasn't been easy keeping this quiet for so long. Love you both, Meg. I read it 4 times. Protecting us, keeping this quiet, make it into some kind of legal thing, as if fairness were a character flaw. As if my asking for what was legally, morally, and contractually mine would be an act of aggression against her children. As if the ledger on the refrigerator, the one with the check marks and the balanced Christmas gifts, had been a joke all along. And the real accounting had happened in whispered phone calls and manila envelopes in a locked filing cabinet. I took out my phone. I photographed every page. The trust, the deed, the email, the wire receipts I had already found. I uploaded them to a cloud folder and emailed them to myself. Then I put the originals back in the folder, in the exact order I had found them, clipped them shut, and slid them behind the medical folder. I locked the cabinet. I went upstairs. I washed my hands. I sat at the kitchen table. I poured a glass of water from the tap and I drank it slowly, one sip at a time, while I looked at the backyard through the sliding glass door. The grass was too long. The bird feeder was empty. There was a plastic kiddie pool in the corner that had been there since Megan's kids visited last summer. My phone was in my hand. I pulled up Megan's contact. Her photo was a selfie with a sunset filter, her face tilted at the angle that made her cheekbones look sharp, her smile wide and white and effortless. I pressed the call button. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and yoga instructor calm. "Claire, hey! This is a surprise. What's up?" I looked at the empty bird feeder. I looked at the overgrown grass. I thought about the $310,056. I thought about the house on Cassidy Avenue with the lilac bush. I thought about my 21st birthday at Red Lobster and my father's phone face down on the table and the fossil watch in its box. "Hey, Meg," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't sound like mine. I need you to come to Mom and Dad's house. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Don't bring Derek. Don't bring the kids. A pause. Is everything okay? Is Dad's leg worse? No, I said. Dad's leg is fine. But we're all going to sit down together. You, me, Mom, and Dad. And we're going to talk about the Eleanor Miller Trust and the wire transfers and the house on Cassidy Avenue. And we're going to talk about why my name is the one that comes with a warning label. The silence on the other end was so complete I could hear her breathing. Quick, shallow, panicked. "Claire," she said. Her voice had dropped to a whisper. "I don't know what you think you found." "Tomorrow," I said, 6 o'clock. Or I call Keller and Associates myself, and then I call a lawyer who doesn't work for Dad. Your choice. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table and I waited for the front door to open. I waited for my parents to come home from the doctor. I waited to look my father in the eye and ask him which came first, the decision to steal from me, or the decision to teach me that hard work was a virtue. The lock turned, the walker thumped. My mother's voice floated down the hall. "Claire? Honey? What are you doing here?" I turned in my chair. I looked at them both. My father in his windbreaker, his leg brace visible beneath his khakis. My mother with her purse still on her shoulder, her keys in her hand. Her face already shifting from surprise to something else. Something colder. Something that looked, for just a split second, like recognition. "We need to talk," I said. "All of us. Megan's coming tomorrow, and I think you both know exactly why." My father's face didn't change at first. He just sat there with his coffee mug halfway to his lips, the chipped ceramic hovering in the air like a paused video. Then he set it down. The sound of porcelain against wood was too loud. "Claire," he said. His voice was low, measured. The same tone he used when I was 8 and he caught me lying about eating the last cookie. "What exactly do you think you know?" "I know about the wire transfers," I said. "I know about the trust. I know about the house on Cassidy Avenue. I know you quitclaimed it to Megan in 2019 for $1. And I know there's a Post-it note in your filing cabinet that says, 'Do not discuss with C.'" I folded my hands on the table. They were steady. I had no idea how. "So what I think is that we've all been playing a game for 30 years and I'm the only one who didn't know the rules." My mother's purse hit the floor. She didn't bend to pick it up. She was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not guilt, but something worse. Recognition. Like she had been waiting for this moment for years and was somehow still unprepared for it. "Claire?" my mother whispered. "Honey, it wasn't supposed to hurt you." My father slammed his palm on the table. The coffee mug jumped. "Linda, don't say another word." He turned to me, and his eyes were different now. Hard, defensive. The father who had called me Claire Bear my whole life was gone, and in his place was a man guarding a vault. "You went through my files. You went into a locked cabinet." "You left the key in the junk drawer," I said. "Same place it's been since I was 12. So let's not pretend I cracked a safe." "You had no right." "I had every right," I said, and my voice broke, but I didn't stop. "I'm a beneficiary of that trust. I have a legal right to every document in that cabinet. I have a right to know that my own father has been stealing from me for 14 years. And I have a right to know why my sister gets to live in a townhouse with a waterfall countertop while I work overnight shifts at Target to make rent. My father pushed himself up from the chair, forgetting his leg brace, and winced when his weight hit the torn ACL. He grabbed the walker. "You don't understand the first thing about this family," he said. His voice was shaking. "You never have. You come in here acting like a lawyer, acting like we owe you some kind of explanation." "We do owe her an explanation," my mother said quietly. My father whipped around. "Linda, shut up." But my mother didn't shut up. She stood there with her hands pressed flat against the kitchen counter, her knuckles white, and she looked at me with tears streaming down her face without her making a sound. "It started because Megan was struggling," she said. "She dropped out of school. She was depressed. She was talking about moving to California with some boy we didn't trust. Your father was trying to protect her. It was supposed to be temporary." "Temporary," I repeated. 168 months. $310,000. That's your definition of temporary? "It got complicated," my mother said. "Complicated," I said. I laughed, but it didn't sound like laughter. It sounded like something breaking. "You know what's complicated, Mom? Working 2 jobs and still choosing between groceries and gas. You know what's not complicated? A wire transfer. You type in the numbers, you press send, every month for 14 years, while your other daughter calls you crying because she's about to get evicted, and you tell her you're on a fixed income." I stood up. The chair scraped against the tile. "Megan's coming tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Be here, all of you, because I'm done being the only person in this family who doesn't get to see the ledger." I walked out. I didn't take the lasagna. I drove home with the radio off, the silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I sat in my apartment parking lot for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, watching my breath fog the windshield in the February cold. Then I went inside, opened my laptop, and started searching. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I searched until my eyes burned. At 9 the next morning, I called the offices of Chen and Holloway, estate litigation. The receptionist put me through to Sarah Chen, a partner whose bio mentioned fiduciary breach and trust disputes. I told her I had evidence of a trustee embezzling from an irrevocable trust, amending it without beneficiary consent, and fraudulently transferring trust property to a third party. My voice sounded like someone else's, professional, detached, like I was reading a script. Sarah Chen had me email the documents. I sent her the photos from my phone, the trust agreement, the wire receipts, the quitclaim deed, the letter from Keller and Associates. She called me back in 40 minutes. "Ms. Miller," she said. Her voice was calm, precise, with a slight Midwestern flatness that made her sound like she was delivering weather reports about a hurricane. "I've reviewed what you sent. I need to be direct with you. What your father did is not a gray area. An irrevocable trust cannot be amended without the consent of all beneficiaries. You were a beneficiary. You were 21 in 2017. You were legally entitled to notice, to consent, and to legal representation of your own. The fact that Keller and Associates processed this amendment suggests either catastrophic malpractice or active collusion." "Collusion," I repeated. The word felt heavy in my mouth. "The quitclaim deed is also void ab initio," she continued. "The trust instrument explicitly prohibits sale or transfer of trust property without unanimous written consent. Your father, as trustee, had no authority to convey that property to your sister. At best, this is breach of fiduciary duty and conversion. At worst, it's fraud, and your sister is holding stolen property. I stared at the wall of my apartment. There was a water stain near the ceiling that I had been meaning to report to my landlord for 3 months. What happens now? That depends on what you want, Sarah said. We can file a petition to void the amendment, void the deed, and recover the property. We can also sue for the missing income distributions, the $1,847 monthly, plus statutory interest, going back to your 21st birthday. That's roughly 8 years of unpaid distributions, plus the value of the property itself. You're looking at a significant 6-figure recovery, possibly more, depending on appreciation. And my father? Silence on the line. Then, he could face personal liability for every dime. If the court finds fraud, the judgment could include punitive damages. And if Keller and Associates knowingly participated, they could be on the hook too. She paused. But Ms. Miller, family litigation is brutal. It will destroy whatever relationship you think you have left. Are you prepared for that? I looked at the water stain. I thought about the Red Lobster birthday dinner. I thought about the Post-it note. I thought about my mother standing in the kitchen with tears on her face, saying it got complicated. They destroyed it already, I said. I'm just documenting the wreckage. Then come in tomorrow morning. We'll draft the petition. I have a family meeting tonight, I said. At 6. Sarah Chen was quiet for a moment. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't let them record you without consent. Ohio is a one-party state, but still. And Claire? She used my first name for the first time. Don't go alone. I won't, I said, though I knew I would. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I printed copies of everything. I organized them in a manila envelope, the same kind my father used. I put on black pants and a gray sweater that made me look older, harder, less like the daughter who used to sit on his lap and ask him to check for monsters under the bed. I arrived at my parents' house at 5:45. The sky was the color of a bruise, purple and sick yellow at the edges. My father's truck was in the driveway, my mother's Camry, and parked at the curb, a silver Subaru Outback with a yoga studio sticker on the back window. Megan was already inside. I walked in without knocking. The house smelled like pot roast and fear. They were in the dining room, the same room where we had eaten Thanksgiving dinners and birthday cakes, and where my father had once given a toast at my high school graduation, his voice thick with pride, saying, "My girls, my 2 beautiful girls." The table was set for 4, which struck me as grotesque, like this was a normal dinner, like we were about to discuss the weather. Megan was sitting in the chair closest to the kitchen. She was wearing a cream-colored turtleneck and gold hoop earrings. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She looked like she was posing for a lifestyle blog. When I walked in, she smiled at me. It was the same smile she had given me when we were kids, and she had eaten a last popsicle and convinced my mother that I had lost mine. "Claire," she said, "I'm so glad you called. I've been worried about you." "Worried," I said. I sat in the chair across from her, the one with the cracked leather seat. My father was at the head of the table, his leg propped on a folding chair. My mother was at the other end, her hands wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't touched. "Why are you worried, Meg?" "You've been under so much stress," she said, her voice dropping into that yoga instructor register, all breath and empathy. "Work, money, the car. Mom told me you've been having a hard time. I think you've been looking for answers in the wrong places." I opened the envelope. I pulled out the first wire receipt and slid it across the table. It stopped in front of her pot roast. January 3rd, 2011, I said. $1,847. That's not an answer I found in the wrong place. That's a bank confirmation number. Megan didn't look at the receipt. She looked at my father. Dad, she said, I thought we agreed. Agreed to what? I asked. Agreed to keep lying? Agreed to make sure I never found out that Grandma's trust was paying my mortgage? Oh, wait. My mortgage. Right. I don't have one. Because I can't afford a house. Because I was told there was no money. My father leaned forward, his forearms pressing into the table. Claire, you need to understand the context. Megan was in a crisis in 2011. She was depressed. She was making bad decisions. Your grandmother's trust was meant to help both of you, but Megan needed it more at that moment. We were going to tell you. We were going to balance it out later. Later, I said. 14 years later. $310,000 later. A quitclaim deed later. I pulled out the deed and placed it on top of the receipt. June 12th, 2019, you gave her the house, Dad. The house that Grandma specifically said could not be transferred without my consent. You signed it over for $1, while I was working double shifts, while I was crying on the phone to Mom about rent. You looked me in the eye and told me you were on a fixed income. My mother's water glass was shaking. She wasn't touching it. We were protecting the asset, my father said. His voice was rising, taking on that defensive bluster men use when they're cornered. Megan had kids. She had stability. You're single, Claire. You don't have dependents. You didn't need a house. I didn't need a house, I said slowly. I needed fairness. I needed the truth. I needed my parents to not treat me like a stranger they had to manage. I turned to Megan. And you wrote them an email. August 2023. I know she's been struggling lately. I don't want the girls to grow up around family drama. You knew. You knew I was drowning, and you wrote them a thank you note for keeping me in the dark. Megan's face changed. The yoga mask slipped. Her jaw tightened and her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she looked like a stranger. Like someone who had been wearing a costume for so long, she had forgotten what her real face looked like. You always do this, she said. Her voice was flat now, cold. You always have to make everything about your suffering, your struggle, your hard work. Do you know what it's like to actually need people? To not be able to just grind your way through everything? I needed that money. I needed that house. I have a family. I have children who need stability. What do you have? A spreadsheet and a Target name tag? The words hit like a physical blow. I felt my breath catch, but I didn't look away. I have a legal right to half the income from that trust, I said. I have a legal right to half the value of that property, and I have a lawyer who says the 2017 amendment is void, the deed is fraudulent, and you are holding stolen property. The room went silent. My father's face drained of color. My mother's hand went to her mouth. You hired a lawyer? My father said. His voice was barely audible. Sarah Chen, I said. Estate litigation. She says we can file next week. We can void the amendment. We can recover the property. And we can sue for every dime of unpaid distributions, plus interest, plus punitive damages. I looked at Megan. That townhouse of yours? The one with the Peloton and the waterfall countertop? It has a lien on it now that you don't even know about. Because a fraudulent transfer doesn't just get undone. It gets traced. Every dollar, every payment, every improvement you made with trust money. It all comes back. Megan stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. It hit the floor with a crack that made my mother flinch. "You ungrateful little bitch," Megan said. The yoga voice was gone. This was something raw, something ancient, something that had been waiting behind her teeth for decades. "You think you deserve that money? You think Grandma wanted you to have it? She didn't even like you. She thought you were cold. She told Dad you were selfish. She changed her mind before she died, and Dad was just honoring her wishes." I felt the floor tilt. My grandmother, the lilac bush, the savings bond, the gardenia perfume. "You're lying," I said, but my voice sounded small. "Am I?" Megan's eyes were bright, vicious. "Ask Dad. Ask him about the letter she wrote in 2011. The one where she said you were too independent to need handouts. The one where she said I was the one who understood family." I looked at my father. He wasn't denying it. He was staring at his hands, his knuckles white around the walker grips. "Is that true?" I asked. My father didn't answer. My mother made a sound. A small, wounded noise, like an animal caught in a trap. "Bob," she said, "tell her. Tell her the truth." My father looked up at me, and his eyes were wet, but not with guilt, with anger, with the rage of a man who had been caught and still believed he was right. "Your grandmother was practical," he said. "She saw that Megan needed more. She saw that you're strong, Claire. You've always been strong. She didn't think you'd suffer. She thought you'd understand." I sat there, and I felt something inside me detach. Not break, detach. Like a rope that had been holding a boat to a dock, finally fraying through. I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I was just floating. "Then show me the letter," I said. "Show me this letter from Grandma where she disinherits me. Show me the document where I signed away my rights. Show me anything, Dad. Show me one piece of paper that proves this wasn't just you and Megan deciding I was strong enough to steal from." He didn't move. He didn't reach for a file. He didn't open a drawer, because there was no letter. There was no document. There was just a story they had told themselves until it felt true. "I didn't think you'd find out," he said. It was the truest thing he had ever said to me. I stood up. I gathered my papers. My hands weren't shaking anymore. "Sarah Chen will be in touch," I said. "Don't contact me unless it's through her. And Dad?" I looked at him one last time. The man who had taught me to ride a bike. The man who had checked for monsters under my bed. The man who had stolen $300,000 from me because he thought I wouldn't notice. The monsters were never under the bed. They were at the kitchen table. I walked out. The cold air hit my face like a slap. I got in my car. I started the engine. I was halfway down the block when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Come back, please. I have something for you. Something your grandmother left. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stared at the screen. The car idled at a stop sign. The streetlight turned red, then green, then red again. I turned the car around. My mother was standing on the front porch, alone. My father and Megan were still inside, their voices muffled through the closed door, rising and falling like a distant storm. She was holding a small envelope, white, unsealed. Her hands were shaking so badly the paper fluttered. "I couldn't give it to you before," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He would have known. he would have taken it. But you need to have it now. You need to know what she really thought. She pressed the envelope into my hands. It was thin, light. Inside, I could feel a single key, small, brass, the kind that opens a safe deposit box. "What's this?" I asked. My mother looked over her shoulder, back at the house where her husband and favored daughter were still arguing about how to manage the damage. Then she looked at me, and her eyes were clear for the first time in years. "Huntington Bank," she said. "Bexley Branch, Box 1847. Your grandmother rented it the month before she died. She told me, she made me promise, that if you ever found out about the trust, I was supposed to give you this." She gripped my wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. She knew, Claire. She knew what he would do. She tried to stop him, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I was too afraid to help her. She let go. She stepped back inside. The door closed. I stood on the porch, holding the envelope, listening to my own heart beat against my ribs. Box 1847. The same number as the wire transfers. The same number as the monthly distribution. My grandmother had left me a message in the only language she knew. Numbers, property, paper trails that outlast people. I got in my car. I didn't go home. I drove east on Main Street, toward Bexley, toward the bank, toward whatever my grandmother had locked away 14 years ago. The envelope sat on my passenger seat, the key pressed against my thigh through the thin paper. I had 168 wire receipts. I had a void trust amendment. I had a fraudulent deed. And now I had a key that my grandmother had hidden from her own son because she knew, she had always known, that one day I would need to open what he had tried to keep closed. The bank was dark when I pulled into the lot, closed for the night. But I sat there in the parking lot, under the security light, and I held that key in my palm until it grew warm from my skin. Tomorrow morning, I would open Box 1847, and I had a feeling that whatever was inside would change the shape of everything. The bank opened at 9, and I was standing at the glass doors at 8:55 with the key digging a red mark into my palm. February wind cut through my coat, but I barely felt it. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a dive into water so deep I couldn't see the bottom, and I had already jumped. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and demanding the truth, between swallowing one more lie or finally opening the door to whatever's waiting on the other side, you might want to stick around for this archive. We don't do comfortable stories here at Karma Archives. We do honest ones. And this one is about to get a lot more honest than my family ever wanted. The manager was a woman named Patricia, 60-ish, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. I filled out the access card with hands that only shook a little. Box 1847. She led me to the vault room in the back, past the mortgage desks and the counting machines, into a space that smelled like steel and old paper. The safe deposit boxes lined the wall like small metal graves. She inserted her master key, I inserted mine, and the box slid out. It was heavier than I expected. She left me alone. The door clicked. I set the box on the table. It was brass-colored, about the size of a shoebox, with a number engraved on the lid, 1847. I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper yellowed with age, were 3 things. First, a stack of $100 bills, banded with a paper strap that had a date written on it in my grandmother's handwriting. For emergencies only, E. I counted them without thinking. 50 bills. $5,000. In 2011, when she had locked this box, that was a significant amount of money. She had known I might need to run. She had known I might need to hire a lawyer. She had left me escape money. Second, a leather journal, small, the kind with a strap closure. My grandmother's handwriting filled every page, cramped and slanted, the pen pressing so hard in places it had torn the paper. Third, a legal document, folded and sealed with a notary stamp. The date was November 14th, 2010, 2 months before she died. I opened the notarized document first. It was a single page, typed on the same cream-colored paper as the trust agreement. A sworn affidavit, signed by Eleanor M. Miller, witnessed by a notary public named Harold Vance, and countersigned by 2 people I didn't recognize, Margaret Holt and James Chen, their addresses listed in Vexley. I, Eleanor M. Miller, being of sound mind and body, do hereby swear and affirm the following. My son, Robert J. Miller, has approached me on 3 separate occasions in the past 6 months, August 12th, September 3rd, and October 29th, 2010, requesting that I modify the irrevocable trust established January 3rd, 1995, to increase the beneficial interest of his elder daughter, Megan, and reduce or eliminate the interest of his younger daughter, Claire. I have refused each request. The trust reflects my wishes exactly. Both my granddaughters are to share equally. I am concerned that Robert may attempt to alter this arrangement after my death without Claire's knowledge or consent. I am creating this affidavit to establish, clearly and legally, that any such modification would be against my express wishes and would constitute a breach of my intent. I request that any court reviewing this matter consider this document as evidence of my true wishes, and I urge the removal of Robert J. Miller as trustee if he is found to have acted against the interests of either beneficiary. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. She had known. My grandmother, the severe woman with the gardenia perfume and the silver hair, had seen it coming. She had watched her son favor Megan, just like I had watched my parents favor Megan, and she had tried to build a wall around me before she died. She had left me a legal shield, locked in a box, waiting for the moment I would need it. I opened the journal. The first entry was dated March 2009. I was 17, Megan was 20. Robert brought Megan to visit today. He made a joke about how Megan has always been the sensitive one, and Claire is the tough one. He said it like it was a compliment to both, but I watched Claire's face. She went still. She does that when she's hurt. She freezes instead of crying. I've seen that look since she was 5. Robert doesn't see it, or he doesn't want to. Linda sees it, I think, but she looks away. I am leaving the house to both girls equally. I only hope it is enough to make up for what their father cannot give. I turned pages. Entry after entry. She documented everything. Dinners where my father praised Megan's art project and asked about my grades with the tone of a tax auditor. Holidays where Megan got the larger slice of pie, the better seat, the first gift. She wrote about a conversation in August 2010 where my father told her that Megan was fragile and needed more support, and that I was self-sufficient and would understand. He actually said, "Claire won't even notice." I told him Claire notices everything. She just doesn't say it because she's learned that saying it costs her more than staying quiet. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. The last entry was dated December 18th, 2010, 12 days before she died. I am tired. The cancer is moving faster than the doctors expected. I have made arrangements with Patricia at Huntington. She is a good woman. She will keep the secret. The key goes to Linda, with instructions to give it to Claire if she ever finds out about the trust. I hate that I have to plan for betrayal. I hate that my son has forced me to write a letter from beyond the grave. But I love Claire more than I hate his weakness. I hope she knows that. I hope she finds this and knows she was always seen. I sat in that vault for 20 minutes, crying silently, my forehead pressed against the cool metal table. I had spent my whole life believing I was invisible, believing that my grandmother's $50 savings bond was the extent of what I meant to her. And she had been the only one watching, the only one who had seen the ledger on the refrigerator for what it was, a performance, a distraction, a way to hide the real imbalance that ran underneath everything like a fault line. I put the affidavit and the journal in my bag. I left the $5,000 in the box. I would need it, but not yet. I closed the lid. I knocked on the door. Patricia let me out. She didn't ask what I had found, but she touched my arm as I passed, a brief pressure, and she said, "Your grandmother was a good woman. She made me promise to keep the box ready. I'm glad you came." I drove straight to Sarah Chen's office. It was on the 8th floor of a glass building downtown, overlooking the Scioto River. Her waiting room had leather chairs and a coffee machine that hissed like a disapproving aunt. She met me at the door of her office, petite, sharp-featured, wearing a navy suit that looked expensive and uncomfortable. She had the kind of eyes that didn't miss details. "You look like someone who found something," she said. I laid the affidavit on her desk. I laid the journal next to it. I told her about the safe deposit box, about the key, about my mother standing on the porch in the cold. Sarah read the affidavit twice. Then she opened the journal and read the first entry. Then she closed it and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. "Proof," I said. "Proof that my father knew he was violating my grandmother's wishes. Proof that the 2017 amendment was fraudulent from the start, not just legally defective, but intentionally deceptive." "It's more than that," Sarah said. She stood up and walked to the window, her arms crossed. "An affidavit like this, created by the grantor of the trust, specifically anticipating trustee misconduct, it's rare, it's powerful. And combined with the wire receipts, the quitclaim deed, and the email from your sister acknowledging the concealment, we don't just have a breach of fiduciary duty case anymore. We have fraud. We have conversion. We have enough to ask for punitive damages, attorney's fees, and possibly criminal referral." "Criminal," I repeated. The word felt foreign in my mouth. "Your father forged your signature, or caused it to be forged, on a legal document. He transferred property he had no right to transfer. He concealed income distributions for 8 years. In Ohio, that's felony theft by deception, felony fraud, and abuse of a vulnerable adult, though that last one might not stick since you were an adult. But the financial crimes? The county prosecutor's office might be very interested." I sat down. The leather chair sighed under me. "I didn't come here to put my father in prison." "I know," Sarah said. She turned to face me. "But you need to understand the leverage you now have. Because the other side is going to come at you hard, and they're going to try to make you feel like the villain for protecting yourself. They're going to say you're destroying the family. They're going to say you're greedy. They're going to say your grandmother would be ashamed. And you need to know, with absolute certainty, that your grandmother expected this. She prepared for it. She left you this ammunition because she wanted you to use it." She walked back to her desk and picked up the affidavit. "I'm filing the petition tomorrow. We're asking for 1. Voiding the 2017 amendment. 2. Voiding the quitclaim deed and returning the property to the trust. 3. Removal of Robert Miller as trustee. 4. Appointment of a corporate trustee. 5. Full accounting of all trust assets and income from 2011 to present. 6. Recovery of all unpaid distributions owed to you with statutory interest. 7. Punitive damages for fraud. And 8. Attorney's fees and costs. How much? I asked. Total? Sarah did math on a legal pad, her pen scratching. Unpaid distributions from March 2017 to present, that's 8 years, at $1,847 per month. That's $177,312. Statutory interest in Ohio for trust breaches is currently 6% compounded annually. That brings the income claim to roughly $210,000. The property at 442 North Cassidy was appraised at $485,000 in 2019 when the quitclaim happened. Current market value in Bexley is closer to $620,000. Your 50% beneficial interest in that property is $310,000. Punitive damages in fraud cases can be up to triple the actual damages. You're looking at a potential recovery in the range of $1.2 to $1.5 million, plus the property itself, which would likely be sold and the proceeds split. I stared at the number she had written. $1.2 million. It didn't feel real. It felt like a typo. And my father? I asked. What happens to him? Personally liable for the shortfall, Sarah said. If the trust assets can't cover it, he pays. If he can't pay, we lien his assets. His house, his savings, his truck, everything he owns. And if the prosecutor gets involved, she shrugged, that's out of our hands. I thought about my father's walker, his sweatpants, the way he had looked at me across the dining room table, still believing he was right. File it, I said. She filed it on Thursday. By Friday afternoon, my phone was a weapon. My father called 17 times. I sent every call to voicemail. My mother called twice. I didn't answer. Megan called once, left a message that started with, "Claire, we need to talk before you do something you can't undo." And I deleted it without listening to the rest. Then, at 6:13 on Friday evening, my doorbell rang. I lived in a second-floor walk-up in a building that smelled like cooking oil and pine cleaner. There was no doorman, no security, just a buzzer that had been broken since I moved in. I looked through the peephole. Derek was standing in the hallway, Megan's husband, freelance graphic designer, Peloton bike owner. He was wearing a Patagonia vest and holding a manila envelope. I didn't open the door. "Claire," he said. He knew I was there. "I know you're home. Your car's in the lot. I just want to talk. 5 minutes. No lawyers, no parents, just us." "Go away, Derek." "I have a proposal," he said, "from the family. It's generous. It's more than you'd get if this goes to court. Just hear me out." I leaned my forehead against the door. The wood was cold. "There is no family anymore, Derek. There's just a group of people who stole from me and are now trying to figure out how much they have to pay to make me disappear." "That's not fair," he said. His voice took on an edge. "Megan's been crying for 3 days. Your mother had a panic attack. Your father can't sleep. Is that what you want? You want to destroy everyone because you feel left out?" I opened the door. Derek stepped back. He hadn't expected that. I looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time in years. He was 35, soft around the middle, with a beard he thought made him look artistic. He had never held a job for more than 18 months. He had never paid a bill that Megan's money didn't cover. He was standing in my hallway, in my building that smelled like cooking oil, holding an envelope full of what he considered generosity, and he had the nerve to ask me if I wanted to destroy people. "What's in the envelope?" I asked. He held it out. "A settlement offer from your father. $200,000. Cash. You sign a release saying you won't pursue any claims against the trust, the property, or any family members. You walk away with $200,000, tax-free, and you never speak about this again." I took the envelope. I didn't open it. I just held it in my hand and looked at him. $200,000, I said. For $310,000 in wire transfers alone. For a property worth $620,000. For 14 years of lies. Your math is bad, Derek. It's a guarantee, he said. His voice was getting tighter. Courts take years. You'll pay lawyer fees. You'll tear the family apart. You'll end up with nothing but bitterness. This way, you get something, and everyone gets to move on. I handed the envelope back to him. "Tell my father his offer is rejected. Tell him Sarah Chen says hello. And tell Megan that the next person who shows up at my door unannounced will be met with a restraining order and a security camera footage package for the judge." Derek's face flushed red. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You're not thinking clearly. You're emotional. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in my entire life," I said. "For the first time, I see the whole board. I see every move you all made while I wasn't looking, and I'm done being the piece that gets sacrificed so the rest of you can keep playing." I closed the door. I locked it. I slid the chain into place. Derek stood in the hallway for a long time. I could hear him breathing through the thin wood. Then his footsteps retreated down the stairs, slow and heavy, like a man walking away from a house he had expected to burn and finding it still standing. I went to my window. I watched him get into the Subaru. I watched him sit there for 5 minutes with his hands on the steering wheel, not moving. Then he drove away. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia from Huntington Bank. Ms. Miller, I thought you should know. Your father came in this morning asking about box 1847. He wanted to know when it was opened, what was inside, who had access. I told him I couldn't discuss it. He was persistent. Please be careful." I read it 3 times. Then I called Sarah Chen. "He's panicking," she said. "Good. Panicking people make mistakes. But Claire, if he's trying to access bank records, if he's asking about the box, he may be preparing to destroy evidence. I need you to secure everything, tonight. The originals from the safe deposit box, your copies, everything. Put it in a safe place, a safety deposit box at a different bank, a fireproof safe, and do not go to your parents' house alone. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, but I was already looking at my closet, at the Rubbermaid bin where I had found the photo album. I was already thinking about the filing cabinet in my parents' basement, because if my father was panicking, if he was trying to figure out what I had found, there was a chance he would go home and start shredding. There was a chance that the original wire receipts, the original trust documents, the original Post-it notes, all the physical evidence that existed only in that gray, dented cabinet, would disappear in a bonfire of self-preservation. I had copies, I had photos, but originals mattered. Originals had weight in court. Originals had my grandmother's handwriting and my father's signature, and the physical truth of paper that had been touched and filed and hidden. I looked at the clock. 8:40. My parents would be home. They were always home by 8. My father's leg made going out difficult. They would be in the living room, watching television, pretending that the world hadn't just tilted off its axis. I grabbed my keys. I grabbed my bag with the affidavit and the journal. I walked out to my car, and I drove north on Route 315 with the radio off and my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wasn't going there to confront them. I wasn't going there to fight. I was going there to get the rest of the proof before it burned. The house was dark when I pulled onto the street. That was wrong. My parents always left the porch light on. The living room light was off too. The only illumination came from the kitchen, a faint yellow glow through the curtains that meant the light above the stove was on, the one my mother always forgot to turn off. I parked 2 houses down. I walked up the driveway. The garage door was closed. My father's truck was inside. My mother's Camry was in the driveway. I went to the side door, the one that led into the kitchen. It was unlocked. That was also wrong. My father locked everything. He had grown up in a house that got robbed once, and he had spent 40 years checking doorknobs twice before bed. I pushed the door open. "Mom?" My voice was a whisper. "Dad?" The kitchen was empty. The pot roast from 2 nights ago was still in the refrigerator, covered in foil. The coffee maker was cold. But there was something on the table. A single sheet of paper held down by my father's coffee mug with the chipped handle. I walked toward it. My shoes made no sound on the linoleum. The paper was a handwritten note, my father's blocky capital letters. I recognized them from the folders in the filing cabinet, from the Post-it note that had started everything. "Claire, we're at the hospital. Your mother had another episode. She's asking for you. Come quick." I stared at the note. I read it again. Another episode. Another panic attack? Something worse? My mother's hands on the porch, pressing the envelope into my palm. Her voice. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I reached for my phone. I was about to call the hospital, Mount Carmel. It would be Mount Carmel. They always went to Mount Carmel, when something made me stop. The handwriting. My father wrote in all caps, always. But the letters on this note were slightly different. The A in Claire had a flat top instead of a peak. The R was rounded where his were usually sharp. And the word quick had a loop on the Q that my father had never made in his life. This wasn't his handwriting. This was my mother's. I looked at the note again, and I saw it. The way the letter slanted slightly left, the way the ink was darker at the end of each stroke, like she had pressed harder, like she had been writing fast or scared. My mother had written this, and she had written it in my father's style. She had used his mug. She had set the scene. Why? I backed away from the table. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned toward the basement door. It was open. Just a crack. A sliver of darkness. In all my years of coming to this house, that door was never open. My father kept it closed. He hated the draft. I pushed it wider. The stairs yawned down into blackness. The light switch was at the bottom, not the top. I had to descend in the dark. I took one step, then another. The stairs creaked. I kept my hand on the railing, the wood smooth from decades of palms. Halfway down, I smelled it. Smoke. Not cigarette smoke, not fireplace smoke. Something sharper, chemical, like burning paper. I ran the rest of the way. I hit the bottom step and fumbled for the light switch. The fluorescent tubes buzzed and flickered. The filing cabinet was open. The drawer was pulled all the way out, hanging at an angle. And on the concrete floor, in a metal wash tub my father used for washing paint rollers, was a fire. Small, controlled, but growing. Papers curled and blackened at the edges. I could see the corner of a manila folder turning to ash. I could see the yellowed edge of a wire receipt curling upward, the numbers disappearing into orange. My father was kneeling beside it. He had a fireplace poker in one hand, stirring the flames. In his other hand, he held a stack of papers. More wire receipts, more folders, more proof. He looked up when the light hit him. His face was streaked with soot. His eyes were wide and wild, the eyes of a man who had already jumped off a cliff and was just now realizing there was no bottom. "Claire," he said, "you weren't supposed to be here." The flames crackled. The smoke rose in a thin column toward the ceiling. I looked at the washtub. I looked at the papers in his hand. I looked at the filing cabinet, empty now, its hanging folders stripped bare. And I realized my mother hadn't written that note to trick me. She had written it to warn me. She had known he would do this. She had tried to get me to the hospital, away from the house, away from what he was about to destroy. But I had come anyway, because I had seen the handwriting, because I had known something was wrong. And now I was standing in the basement, watching my father burn the last of the evidence, with smoke in my lungs and my grandmother's affidavit in my bag, and a choice in front of me that would define everything that came next. I pulled out my phone. I opened the camera. I started recording. "Robert Miller," I said. My voice was steady, steadier than I felt. "You are currently destroying evidence in a pending fiduciary dispute. This is being recorded. The fire in the washtub contains original wire transfer receipts and trust documents. You are holding additional documents in your left hand. I am a beneficiary of the Eleanor M. Miller Trust, and I am exercising my right to document trustee misconduct." My father's face went slack. The poker clattered against the washtub. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "I already am," I said. The flames licked higher. The smoke alarm upstairs started to scream, and somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, must have seen the smoke through the basement window. She had called the fire department. She had called the police. My father dropped the papers. They scattered on the concrete. Some fell into the washtub. Some landed at my feet. I looked down. A wire receipt. Dated March 3rd, 2015. Amount: $1,847.00. Recipient: Megan Miller. And beneath it, a document I had never seen before. A second trust amendment, dated 2019. Not the one from Keller and Associates, a different one. Signed by my father and my sister, removing me entirely, naming Megan the sole beneficiary. He had tried to burn it. He had tried to burn everything. But the fire wasn't fast enough. And I was standing in the smoke with my camera rolling, watching my father's empire of lies turn to ash in a paint wash tub, while the sirens grew louder, and the truth, finally, became impossible to burn. The basement door slammed open. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. I turned, still recording, and I saw my mother standing in the fluorescent light, with her hand over her mouth and tears streaming down her face, and a fire extinguisher in her other hand that she didn't seem to know how to use. "Claire," she said. Claire, I'm sorry. I tried to stop him. I tried. The smoke alarm screamed. The sirens wailed. My father sat on the cold concrete floor, his hands black with ash, looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Defeat. And in that moment, with the fire dying and the police pulling into the driveway and my mother's voice breaking in the stairwell, I knew that the story wasn't over. It was just beginning to burn in the other direction. The first officer through the basement door was young, maybe 25, with a shaved head and a flashlight that swept across the smoke like a blade. He saw my father on the concrete covered in ash. He saw the washtub with the charred paper. He saw me standing in the corner with my phone still recording, my arm shaking so badly the image must have looked like it was filmed during an earthquake. "Police," he said. "Everybody freeze!" My father didn't move. He just sat there, his bad legs splayed out at an awkward angle, staring at the blackened remains of his own evidence with an expression I can only describe as hollow. Like someone had reached inside him and scooped out everything that made him capable of pretending. The second officer was a woman, older, with a name tag that read DeLuca. She took in the scene in one glance, the filing cabinet, the scattered papers, the fire extinguisher my mother had dropped at the bottom of the stairs, and she looked at me. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "No," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "What's happening here?" I lowered my phone. I stopped the recording. "My father was destroying evidence," I said. "In a pending estate dispute. I have video. Those papers he was burning are original financial documents related to a trust I'm a beneficiary of. He was trying to destroy them before a court hearing." Officer DeLuca looked at my father. Then she looked at the washtub. Then she looked at the papers still scattered on the floor. The 2019 amendment, the wire receipts, the charred edges curling like dead leaves. "Sir," she said to my father, "do you have an explanation?" My father said nothing. He just stared at his hands. They were black with soot and trembling. My mother was still on the stairs, one hand on the railing, her face streaked with tears and smoke. "He didn't mean to hurt anyone," she whispered. But the officer wasn't looking at her. She was looking at the evidence. They called the fire department to clear the smoke, and they called a detective. My father was read his rights while sitting on his own basement floor, his leg brace visible beneath his ash-stained sweatpants. They didn't handcuff him because of his knee, but they made it clear he was not free to leave. The charge, initially, was obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. Later, they would add arson in the 4th degree because the fire was intentional and could have spread. I gave my statement in the kitchen, at the same table where 2 nights ago I had laid out the wire receipts and demanded answers. Officer DeLuca took notes on a tablet. She asked me to email her the video. I did, right there, my thumb hovering over the send button before I pressed it. "Ms. Miller," she said when she finished, "you understand this is now a criminal matter as well as a civil one?" "I understand," I said. "And you understand that your father may be arrested tonight?" I looked through the doorway at the basement stairs. I could hear the murmur of voices, the crackle of a police radio, my father's low cough. "I understand," I said again. They took him to the cruiser at 11:15. I watched from the front porch as he limped between 2 officers, his walker left behind in the hallway. He didn't look back at the house. He didn't look at me. My mother stood in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself, making small sounds that weren't quite words. The neighbors' lights were on. Mrs. Gable was standing on her lawn in a bathrobe, holding a phone. I saw the flash of a camera from somewhere down the street. In the age of Nextdoor and Ring cameras, nothing stays private for long. I drove home at midnight. I didn't sleep. I sat on my apartment floor with my back against the couch, and I read my grandmother's journal again, page by page, entry by entry, until the words stopped making sense and became just shapes on paper. At 6 a.m, I called Sarah Chen. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her about the basement, the fire, the 2019 amendment I had found on the floor, the video, the police. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm filing an emergency motion this morning. We're asking the court to freeze all assets held by your father, your mother, and your sister, pending final judgment. The house on Cassidy, their personal residence, bank accounts, investment accounts, everything. And I'm adding a claim for fraudulent conveyance. That 2019 amendment, signed by your sister, implicates her directly. She's not just a beneficiary anymore. She's a co-conspirator." "She's my sister," I said. The words came out automatic, a reflex. "She's an adult who signed a legal document fraudulently removing you from your inheritance," Sarah said. Her voice was gentle but firm. "I know this is hard, but you need to start seeing this clearly. There are no victims in that house except you. Everyone else made choices, repeatedly, for years." She filed the motion at 9. By noon, the court had granted a temporary restraining order, freezing the Cassidy property and all known accounts. By 2, a process server had delivered the paperwork to my sister's townhouse. Megan called me 6 times. I sent her to voicemail. The 7th call was a text. "You happy now? Derek says we might lose the house. The girls are crying. I hope you're proud." I didn't respond. I sat in my apartment with the curtains drawn, and I waited for the next thing to happen. It happened 3 weeks later. The legal process in Ohio moved slowly, but Sarah Chen knew how to make it move. She had filed the original petition, the emergency motion, and a motion for expedited discovery. The judge assigned to the case, a woman named Honorable Patricia Okonkwo, had a reputation for not tolerating fiduciary misconduct. She scheduled a preliminary hearing for April 14th. But before that, there were depositions. I had never been deposed. I didn't know what to expect. Sarah prepared me in her office for 3 hours. "They will try to rattle you," she said. "Your father's attorney, his name is Gerald Holt, and he's a defense specialist, will ask you questions designed to make you look greedy, unstable, vindictive. He will ask about your student loans. He will ask about your job at Target. He will ask if you've ever been treated for mental health issues. He will ask if you have a drinking problem. He will try to find anything that suggests you're not a credible beneficiary, but rather a disgruntled daughter looking for a payday." "I've never been treated for anything," I said. "I don't drink. I work hard." "I know," Sarah said, "but you need to answer only the question asked. Don't volunteer. Don't explain. Don't get emotional. This is a performance, and the audience is the judge who will eventually read the transcript." The deposition was on March 22nd, my 29th birthday. 8 years to the day since the Red Lobster dinner where my father had checked his phone 17 times while the 2017 amendment sat in a file somewhere, already executed, already stealing from me. We met in a conference room at Gerald Holt's office downtown. It smelled like leather and lemon polish. The court reporter sat at the end of the table, her fingers hovering over a stenotype machine. Sarah sat to my left. Gerald Holt sat across from me, a man in his 60s with a red tie and a voice that sounded like he was constantly clearing his throat. He asked me about my childhood, about the ledger on the refrigerator, about whether I had ever felt less loved than my sister. He asked if I had ever been jealous of Megan, if I had ever stolen from her, if I had ever lied to my parents. He asked about my financial situation, my debts, my spending habits. He asked if I had ever asked my parents for money and been refused. Yes, I said when the answer was yes. No, when it was no. I didn't elaborate. I didn't cry. I sat there in a black blazer I had bought for $20 at Goodwill, and I answered his questions like I was reading from a script that had already been written. Then Sarah took her turn. She asked me to identify the documents I had found, the wire receipts, the trust agreement, the affidavit from my grandmother, the journal. She asked me to describe the night of the fire. She played the video on a laptop for the record. The court reporter's fingers flew. Gerald Holt's face turned a color I can only describe as boiled. After 4 hours, we broke. I went to the bathroom and threw up. Then I washed my face, put on more lipstick, and went back in. My father's deposition was the next day. I wasn't allowed to attend, but Sarah called me at 6 p.m. with a report. He lied, she said. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, excitement, restrained. He claimed the 2017 amendment was authorized by you. He claimed you had verbally agreed to let Megan take your share because she needed it more. He claimed the 2019 amendment was your idea, that you had told him you wanted out of the trust entirely to avoid family conflict. Gerald Holt asked him if he had any written evidence of these conversations. He said no. Then I played the video of the basement fire. I played the affidavit from your grandmother. I asked him why, if you had voluntarily given up your interest, he needed to burn the documents proving it. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. I sat down on my kitchen floor. He pled the Fifth in a civil deposition, which means the judge can draw an adverse inference, which means, for our purposes, he just admitted guilt by silence. Sarah paused. But Claire, the best part was the 2019 amendment. I had it authenticated by a handwriting expert. Your signature on it? It's a forgery. A good one, but a forgery. Your sister and your father conspired to forge your signature on a document that stripped you of your entire beneficial interest. That's not just fraud anymore. That's criminal forgery. The prosecutor's office called me this afternoon. They're opening a formal investigation. I looked at my hands. They were steady. What about Megan? She's been summoned for deposition next week. If she lies under oath, it's perjury. If she tells the truth, she implicates herself. Either way, she's trapped. Sarah's voice softened. I need to warn you. If the prosecutor files charges, this becomes public. Your family's name, the details, everything. There's still time to settle. Gerald Holt approached me today with a new offer. $400,000, full release, no admission of fault, and a confidentiality agreement. $400,000, I repeated. It's more than the last offer. It's less than you're likely to win at trial. But it would end this. No criminal charges, no public record, no testifying against your father in court. I thought about my mother, about the porch light that hadn't been on, about the way she had pressed the key into my hand, about the note she had written, trying to warn me. What's your recommendation? I asked. My recommendation, Sarah said carefully, is that you take nothing less than full recovery. But I'm your lawyer, not your therapist. This is your family. This is your life after the judgment. You need to decide what you can live with. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat by my window and watched the parking lot until dawn. At 7, I texted Sarah. No settlement, full recovery. And if the prosecutor charges them, I will testify. Megan's deposition was scheduled for March 29th. I was not required to attend, but Sarah said I could observe if I stayed silent. I went. I needed to see it. The conference room was the same, the lemon polish smell, the court reporter. Gerald Holt sat next to Megan, his hand occasionally covering her wrist when she started to shake. She was wearing a gray sweater and no makeup. She looked smaller than I remembered. The yoga instructor glow was gone. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. Sarah started slow. She asked Megan about her education, her marriage, her children. Then she produced the 2019 amendment. "Ms. Miller," Sarah said, "do you recognize this document?" Megan looked at it. Her throat moved. "Yes." "Can you tell me what it is?" It's an amendment to my grandmother's trust." "And whose signature is that next to yours?" Megan looked at the paper. She didn't look at me. "It says Claire Miller." "Is that your sister's actual signature?" Silence. The court reporter's machine clicked. "I don't know," Megan whispered. "You don't know," Sarah repeated. "Ms. Miller, you signed this document in 2019. You were 31 years old. You had a college education. Are you telling me you signed a legal document that removed your sister from a trust and you didn't verify whose signature was on it?" "I trusted my father," Megan said. Her voice was breaking. "He said Claire agreed. He said she wanted out. He said she was angry about the trust and didn't want anything to do with Grandma's money. I believed him." "Did you ever ask your sister directly?" "No." "Did you ever wonder why, if Claire wanted out, your father needed to forge her signature?" Gerald Holt objected. "Speculation. Calls for a legal conclusion." "Sustained," the court reporter noted for the record, though there was no judge present. Sarah changed tack. She produced the email from August 2023, the one where Megan thanked my parents for keeping me in the dark. "Did you write this?" Sarah asked. Megan's face crumpled. "Yes." "And when you wrote, 'I know she's been struggling lately,' did you know she was struggling because your parents were sending you her share of the trust income?" I didn't think about it that way." "You didn't think about it," Sarah said. Her voice was level, clinical, devastating. "Ms. Miller, over the past 14 years, you've received approximately $310,000 in wire transfers from a trust in which your sister held an equal beneficial interest. You received a property worth $620,000 through a fraudulent quitclaim deed. You signed a forged amendment, and you didn't think about it." Megan started to cry. Not the performative tears of someone trying to win sympathy. These were ugly, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. "I was scared," she said. "I was scared of losing everything. Derek doesn't work. The kids, the house. I didn't know how to make money. I didn't know how to be the one who didn't get help. I didn't know how to be you." The room went quiet. Even Gerald Holt stopped objecting. I sat in my chair against the wall, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but understanding. Megan had been the favorite her whole life, and it had made her weak. She had never learned to survive without the drip of someone else's money. She had built a life on a foundation that was actually a drain, and now the foundation was cracking, and she had no idea how to stand on her own. But understanding isn't absolution, and weakness isn't an excuse for theft. Sarah ended the deposition. Megan was escorted out by Gerald Holt, still crying, her sweater sleeve pressed against her face. She didn't look at me. I was glad. I wasn't sure what my face would have shown her. Outside in the hallway, Sarah turned to me. The prosecutor called while we were in there. They're presenting to the grand jury next week. Your father will be indicted for fraud, forgery, and evidence tampering. They're considering charges against Megan, too. Accessory after the fact at minimum. Possibly conspiracy. I leaned against the wall. The plaster was cool against my back. What happens now? Now, we wait for the preliminary hearing. The judge will review the evidence and likely order full discovery, forensic accounting, bank subpoenas, the works. We're going to find every penny. And then, Claire, she touched my arm. Then we decide what justice looks like. I went home. I lay on my couch. I stared at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than rage. I felt exhaustion. The kind that sinks into your bones and makes your limbs feel like they're filled with wet sand. At 9 that night, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole. It was my mother. She was wearing a coat I didn't recognize, a long black wool thing that looked expensive and new. Her hair was down. She had a box in her hands, a banker's box, the kind with a lid. I opened the door. "Mom," I said. She didn't step inside. She just stood in the hallway, holding the box, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. It was something harder, something resolved. "I left your father," she said. I stared at her. "This morning, I packed a bag. I went to a hotel. I'm not going back." She held out the box. "This is everything. The original trust agreement from 1995, the original deed, the original bank records from 2011, every wire transfer receipt he made me keep in a separate lockbox, and this." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. It was sealed with wax, red wax, stamped with the letter E. "Your grandmother gave this to me 3 days before she died," my mother said. "She made me promise to give it to you if you ever found out the truth. I kept it from you for 14 years because I was afraid. Because your father told me that if I ever helped you, he would leave me with nothing. Because I was weak." Her voice broke, but she kept going. "But I'm not weak anymore. I watched him burn evidence in our basement. I watched him lie to the police. I watched him ruin both his daughters because he couldn't stand the thought of being fair. And I'm done." She pressed the box into my hands. Then she pressed the envelope on top of it. "I'm going to testify for you," she said. "At the hearing. Against your father, against Megan if I have to. I know what I did. I know I was complicit. I know you may never forgive me. But I want you to have this. I want you to know that your grandmother saw you. She saw all of it. And she tried so hard to make sure you were protected from the people who should have loved you most." I looked down at the envelope, the red wax, the letter E. "What's in it?" I asked. My mother's eyes were dry now, dry and clear and hard as stone. "The truth," she said. "The truth about why your father hated you. The truth about why he chose Megan. The truth about what really happened in January 2011. She turned and walked down the hallway. Her footsteps echoed on the stairs. I stood in my doorway, holding the box and the envelope, listening to her car start in the parking lot below. I went inside. I locked the door. I sat at my kitchen table. The box sat in front of me. The envelope sat on top of it. I knew I should call Sarah. I knew I should photograph everything before I opened it. I knew I should preserve the chain of custody, but I was alone in my apartment, and my mother had just told me that my father hated me, and that there was a reason, and that my grandmother had known it, and that it had all started in January 2011. I broke the wax seal. I pulled out the letter inside. It was written on the same cream paper as the trust. My grandmother's handwriting, cramped and slanted, but shakier than the journal. The pen had skipped in places. She had been weak when she wrote this. She had been dying. My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. Your father has betrayed you, and I was not strong enough to stop him while I lived. I am sorry. I am sorrier than words can express. But you need to know the truth. Not the truth about the trust, or the money, or the house. The truth about why. In January 2011, your sister came to me. She was pregnant. The father was not her boyfriend. It was a man she would not name. She was terrified. She asked me for money for a procedure. I refused. I told her she needed to tell your parents. She did. And your father, who had always favored her, who had always seen her as his perfect girl, blamed you. He said it was your fault. He said you had introduced Megan to the wrong crowd. He said you had been a bad influence. He said you didn't deserve the trust because you had already cost him enough. It was insane. It was delusional. But I watched him believe it. I watched him rewrite the story in his head until you were the villain and Megan was the victim, and the money became his way of punishing you for a crime you never committed. He has hated you since that day. Not because of anything you did, but because he needed someone to blame for Megan's mistake. And you were the only one who wouldn't fight back. I am leaving you the key to the box. I am leaving you the affidavit. I am leaving you what protection I can. But I want you to know with absolute certainty that you did nothing wrong. You were never the problem. You were never less loved. You were simply the child who was strong enough to survive without being loved. And that strength became the excuse they used to withhold what was yours. Be brave, my darling. Be brave enough to take it all back. Eleanor. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully. I put it back in the envelope. I sat at my kitchen table, in the dark, with my grandmother's letter in my hands, and the truth finally making sense. January 2011. Megan was pregnant. My father blamed me. And for 14 years, he had punished me for a sin I didn't commit, while sending my sister $1,847 a month to buy her silence and her loyalty and her complicity in the lie. The hearing was in 2 weeks. I had the affidavit, I had the journal, I had the video, I had the forged amendment, I had the letter, and now I had the reason. I picked up my phone. I called Sarah Chen. I have new evidence, I said, and I have a witness, my mother. She's going to testify. And Sarah? Yes? I want punitive damages. I want the property. I want every dime. And I want my father to explain to a judge why he spent 14 years stealing from a daughter who never did anything wrong except be strong enough to survive without him. I hung up. I looked at the letter. I looked at the box of evidence. The hearing was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be the one sitting in the dark reading numbers that didn't add up. This time, I would be the one holding the ledger. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for April 14th at the Franklin County Courthouse, a limestone building downtown that looked like it had been carved from a single block of disapproval. I arrived at 8:30 in the morning, wearing the same black blazer from the deposition, now pressed and paired with gray slacks I had bought on clearance at Kohl's. Sarah Chen walked beside me up the wide steps, her briefcase swinging in rhythm with her stride. She was wearing a navy suit and the expression of someone who had already read the last page of the book and knew the ending was good. "Today is about establishing the facts for the record," she said as we passed through the metal detectors. "The judge will review the evidence, hear testimony, and determine whether there's sufficient cause to proceed to trial. But more importantly, she'll rule on our motion to freeze assets and appoint a corporate trustee. If we win today, your father loses control of everything. The house, the accounts, the property on Cassidy, all of it gets locked down." "And if we don't win?" I asked. Sarah looked at me. "We will." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Not the grand jury box from television dramas, but a conference-style room with a raised bench, a witness stand, and a long table where the parties sat facing each other. The wood was dark and scuffed. The air smelled like old paper and floor wax. I sat on the left side with Sarah. On the right, Gerald Holt arranged his files with the precision of a man who knew he was holding a losing hand. Next to him sat my father. I hadn't seen him since the night of the fire. He looked smaller. He had lost weight and his suit hung loose on his shoulders. His leg brace was visible beneath the table, a plastic and metal reminder of the pickup basketball game that had started this whole unraveling. He didn't look at me when I sat down. He stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench, his hands folded on the table, his knuckles white. Megan was not there. Gerald Holt had filed a motion to sever her deposition testimony, citing her emotional distress and her attorney's advice to invoke the Fifth Amendment regarding the forged signature. She was, for now, a spectator in her own downfall. The bailiff entered. "All rise! The Honorable Patricia Okonkwo presiding." Judge Okonkwo was a tall woman with silver-streaked locks pulled back in a severe bun. She wore black robes and reading glasses on a chain. She took her seat, surveyed the room with a glance that seemed to catalog every detail, and picked up the file. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was warm, but edged with authority, like a teacher who had already caught you passing notes. "This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Miller v. Miller, case number 2026-CV-0147. We are here to review allegations of breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent conveyance, conversion, and civil fraud relating to the Eleanor M. Miller Irrevocable Trust." She looked at Sarah. "Counsel for petitioner, you may proceed." Sarah stood. She moved to the lectern with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times and still cared about the 101st. "Your Honor, the evidence before this court demonstrates a sustained, deliberate, and fraudulent scheme by the trustee, Robert Miller, to deprive my client, Claire Miller, of her lawful, beneficial interest in an irrevocable trust. Over a period of 14 years, Mr. Miller diverted 168 monthly distributions, totaling over $310,000, to his elder daughter, while telling the younger that no funds existed. He then executed a void quitclaim deed transferring trust real property to that same daughter. He concealed these acts through a pattern of deception that included forged signatures, destroyed evidence, and perjured testimony." She paused. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. "But the financial theft, Your Honor, is only the mechanism. The cruelty is the message. Claire Miller was told her entire life that she was loved equally, that fairness was the foundation of this family. While her parents maintained that performance, they were running a second ledger in secret, one where her share was systematically stolen and her questions were systematically silenced. We are asking this court to right that wrong, to void the fraudulent amendments, to recover the property, to freeze the trustees' assets, and to appoint an independent corporate trustee to ensure that no daughter is ever invisible again. Judge Okonkwo made a note. Then she turned to Gerald Holt. Counsel for respondent? Holt stood. He cleared his throat with that sound like gravel in a blender. Your Honor, this is a family dispute that has been escalated beyond all proportion. Robert Miller is a hard-working man who made difficult decisions during a financial crisis. The distributions to Megan Miller were loans, not gifts, intended to be reconciled against future estate planning. The 2017 amendment was executed with the advice of counsel and represented a good faith effort to address the differing needs of two daughters. The 2019 document was similarly well-intentioned. My client acknowledges that his methods were imperfect, but he categorically denies any fraudulent intent. Imperfect, Judge Okonkwo repeated. She didn't look up from her notes. Counsel, I've reviewed the affidavit of Eleanor Miller. I've reviewed the video of Mr. Miller burning documents in his basement while a police officer stood by. I've reviewed the handwriting analysis of the forged signature. Is your defense seriously that this was a matter of imperfect methods? Holt's face reddened. Your Honor, the criminal investigation is separate from these civil proceedings. My client has not been convicted of anything. Nor has he been exonerated, the judge said. Proceed with your evidence. Sarah called her first witness, my mother. Linda Miller walked to the stand with the careful steps of a woman who had spent 30 years learning to be small and was now trying to remember how to take up space. She was sworn in. She sat. She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the mother who would tire me to tie my shoes, who had bandaged my scraped knees, who had kept the ledger on the refrigerator with its careful check marks. Then she looked at my father, and her face changed into something harder, something final. Mrs. Miller, Sarah said, did your husband, Robert Miller, ever discuss the Eleanor Miller Trust with you in private? Yes, my mother said. Her voice was quiet but clear. Many times. Did he ever tell you why he began sending the full monthly distribution to your daughter Megan in 2011? My mother's hands gripped the witness stand railing. He said Megan needed it more. He said Claire was strong. He said Claire wouldn't miss it. Did he ever tell you that Claire had agreed to this arrangement? No, he never asked her. He never told her the trust existed. Did you ever try to tell Claire? My mother's eyes found mine. I wanted to. So many times. But he said he would leave me. He said I would lose the house. He said no one would believe me. She took a breath. I was a coward. I let my daughter be robbed because I was afraid of being alone. And I am sorry. I will be sorry until I die. The words hung in the air like smoke. My father shifted in his chair, his jaw tightened. Sarah produced the red wax envelope. Mrs. Miller, do you recognize this? I gave it to Claire. It was from her grandmother. Eleanor made me promise to give it to her if she ever found out. And what did it contain? The truth, my mother said. About why Robert hated Claire. About Megan's pregnancy in 2011, about how he blamed Claire for something she never did, and used that blame to justify stealing from her for 14 years. Gerald Holt objected. Hearsay, speculation, relevance? Judge Okonkwo overruled him.
This court is interested in motive, counsel. Continue.
Sarah stepped back. No further questions. Gerald Holt rose for cross-examination. He approached my mother with a smile that looked like it had been rehearsed in a mirror and still hadn't convinced the face wearing it. Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that you are currently separated from your husband? Yes. And isn't it true that you stand to benefit financially if your daughter wins this case? That you might receive support from her? My mother looked at him with an expression of such withering contempt that even Holt seemed to shrink slightly. I left my husband with nothing but a suitcase and a car that needs new brakes. I don't want Claire's money. I want her to have what was always hers. And I want him to face what he did. Holt tried 2 more questions, but my mother's answers were unshakable. He sat down. Sarah called me to the stand. I had sworn to tell the truth so many times in the past month that the words felt like a prayer I no longer believed in. I sat in the witness chair. I looked out at the room, my father refusing to meet my eyes, Holt shuffling papers, the court reporter's fingers poised over her machine, and Sarah, standing at the lectern, nodding almost imperceptibly. Ms. Miller, she said, when did you first learn of the Eleanor Miller Trust? February 14th, 2026, I said. I found wire transfer receipts on my father's laptop while helping him pay bills after his knee surgery. And what was your financial situation at that time? I was working 2 jobs. I had $32,000 in student loan debt. I was living in a second-floor walk-up apartment. I had been denied financial assistance by my parents on multiple occasions, most recently in 2020 when I was at risk of eviction. Did your parents ever mention the trust? Never. They told me they were on a fixed income. They told me they couldn't help. They told me hard work was enough. Sarah produced the journal from the safe deposit box. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Petitioner's Exhibit 7, the Journal of Eleanor Miller. Ms. Miller, can you identify this? Yes, I found it in a safe deposit box at Huntington Bank, box 1847. My grandmother left it for me. It documents my father's favoritism toward Megan dating back to our childhood. And this affidavit? She held up the notarized document, also from the safe deposit box. My grandmother anticipated my father's misconduct and created this affidavit to prevent it. It explicitly states that any modification reducing my interest would be against her wishes. Judge Okonkwo took the documents. She read them slowly, her finger tracing the lines. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Then she looked at my father. Mr. Miller, she said, do you wish to testify? Gerald Holt leaned in and whispered urgently. My father shook his head. Once. Sharp. He does not, Your Honor, Holt said. Then I will rule on the pending motions. Judge Okonkwo, set down the affidavit. She removed her glasses. She looked at my father with an expression that made me understand, suddenly, why people feared judges. It wasn't the robe. It wasn't the gavel. It was the look of someone who had seen every excuse, every lie, every pathetic attempt to dress up theft as love, and was simply tired. Mr. Miller, she said, you were entrusted with your mother's legacy. You were entrusted with the care of 2 daughters, and you chose, systematically and over the course of 14 years, to betray one of them. You hid income. You forged documents. You transferred property in violation of an irrevocable trust. You attempted to destroy evidence when confronted. And you did all of this while maintaining a performance of parental equality that can only be described as psychological cruelty. She picked up her pen. The motion to void the 2017 and 2019 amendments is granted. The quitclaim deed to 442 North Cassidy Avenue is void ab initio. The property is hereby returned to the trust. The motion to remove Robert Miller as trustee is granted. Huntington Bank Trust Department is appointed successor trustee, effective immediately. The motion to freeze respondents' personal assets is granted, pending final accounting and judgment. She wrote. The scratch of her pen was the only sound. On the question of damages, this court finds sufficient evidence of fraud to warrant punitive damages. Ms. Chen, you will submit a proposed judgment within 10 days. I expect it to include full recovery of unpaid distributions, statutory interest, attorney's fees, and punitive damages in an amount sufficient to deter this conduct. Mr. Miller, you are personally liable for any shortfall. She closed the file. She looked at me. Ms. Miller, the law cannot give you back the years you were deceived. It cannot give you back the birthday dinners where you were told you were loved while being robbed. But it can give you what remains. And I hope, though I have learned not to expect, that your family finds some path to honesty, however narrow. She stood. We're adjourned. The gavel cracked. I sat in the witness chair, and I felt the floor return beneath my feet. Not happiness, not victory, just the solid, undeniable truth of gravity. I had been believed. The numbers had been counted. The ledger, finally, balanced. Sarah hugged me. It was brief and professional, and somehow meant more than any embrace I had ever received from my father. We'll have the final numbers in 2 weeks, she said. But Claire, it's over. You won. I walked out of the courthouse into sunlight so bright it hurt my eyes. My mother was waiting on the steps. She was smoking a cigarette. I hadn't known she smoked. And when she saw me, she dropped it and ground it out with her shoe. How bad? She asked. He lost everything, I said. The trust, the property, control. He's liable for damages. My mother's face crumpled, not with relief, with grief. For the marriage, for the lie, for the 30 years she had spent believing that keeping peace was the same as keeping love. I'm going to stay at the extended stay on Morse Road, she said, until I figure out what comes next. I have a little money from my sister. I can get a job. I'm only 59. I can still do something. I looked at her. The woman who had given me the key. The woman who had stood on my porch in the cold and said she was done being weak. She was still afraid, still broken, still complicit in ways that no court could fully forgive. But she had chosen, finally, to tell the truth. And in the economy of this family, that was a currency more valuable than any trust distribution. You can stay with me, I said, for a while, until you get on your feet. She started to cry. I didn't hug her, but I didn't walk away either. We stood on the courthouse steps, 2 women who had survived the same war on opposite sides, and we watched the traffic go by until the sun warmed the stone beneath us. The final judgment came on May 3rd. The numbers were staggering. Unpaid distributions with interest, $198,400. 50% beneficial interest in the Cassidy property at current market value, $310,000. Punitive damages for fraud, $450,000. Attorney's fees and costs, $42,000. Total recovery, just over $1 million. The corporate trustees sold the Cassidy property. I couldn't live there, not with what it represented, and split the proceeds. My half went into a managed investment account. The other half went into a trust for Megan's children, because even after everything, I couldn't punish children for their mother's weakness. Megan filed for divorce from Derek 3 weeks after the hearing. Without the trust money, without the house, without my father's support, their lifestyle collapsed like a tent with the poles removed. Derek moved back in with his parents. Megan took a full-time job at a yoga studio and rented a 1-bedroom apartment. I heard, through my mother, that she was in therapy, that she had admitted the pregnancy in 2011 had been terminated, and that she had carried the secret until it poisoned everything. That she was trying, clumsily and too late, to learn how to be someone who earned her own way. My father was indicted by the grand jury in June. The charges included felony fraud, felony forgery, tampering with evidence, and theft by deception. He pled guilty to avoid trial because Gerald Holt told him that a jury would hate him. And Holt was right. He was sentenced to 18 months in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. He would never practice as a trustee again. He would never own a home again. He would die with a criminal record and a daughter who knew exactly what he had cost her. I visited him once in August, before his sentence began. We sat in a conference room at the county jail, separated by plexiglass, speaking through phones that smelled like disinfectant. He looked old. He looked like a stranger who was wearing my father's face as a poorly fitted mask. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I don't," I said. "I won't. But I need you to know one thing. I was never the problem. Megan's pregnancy wasn't my fault. The trust wasn't too much for me to handle. You chose to hate me because it was easier than facing that your favorite child had made a mistake. And that choice cost you everything." He didn't answer. He just looked at his hands. The same hands that had signed 168 wire receipts, that had held a fireplace poker over a tub of burning paper, that had once checked for monsters under my bed. I hung up the phone. I walked out. I didn't look back. I moved into a 2-bedroom condo in German Village in September. I paid off my student loans in full. I quit the Target job. I took a promotion at the medical supply company, logistics manager, $72,000 a year, plus benefits. I bought a car that didn't need new tires. I started a savings account for emergencies, and I kept $5,000 in cash in a fireproof safe, because my grandmother had taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can have is the ability to walk away. My mother lives in a small apartment in Clintonville now. She works part-time at a library. We have dinner every Sunday. We don't talk about the trial. We don't talk about my father. We talk about books, about the weather, about whether the tomatoes in her window box will survive the frost. It's not forgiveness. It's a truce. And for now, that's enough. Sometimes I drive past the old house on Cassidy Avenue. The new owners tore out the lilac bush and put in a deck. The yellow cushions are gone from the sun porch, but I can still smell the gardenias if I close my eyes. I can still see my grandmother's silver hair catching the light. I can still hear her telling me to save the savings bond for something important. I did. I saved it for my freedom. That's another file closed in the Karma archives. But the archives never stay closed for long. There's always another ledger, another secret, another reckoning waiting in the dark. If this story kept you hooked, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching.